Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2001's Final Fantasy X, the entry that brought the iconic RPG franchise into fully voice-acted 3D for the first time.
Following that is the game that defined a computing company's entrance into the console market, as well as the feasibility of first-person shooters on a twin-stick controller, 2001's Halo Combat Evolved. So yeah, I think it's a pretty easy theme this week. Both games are from 2001.
Yeah, so I saw that you were doing Halo this week, and I was like, Halo is like the biggest release of 2001. What if I went and saw what another one of the bigger releases of 2001 would be, and I saw Final Fantasy X on the list, and I was like, I'm playing that right now. Yeah, why not? And it's also kind of like an East versus West thing. Because you've got one of the biggest games to come out of Japan in that year, and then you have, without a doubt, the biggest game to come out of America that year.
And it's also PlayStation and Xbox. US versus Japan. That's a good way. So yeah, it's kind of like that theme there. That totally makes sense. But yeah, also I think you could even make the case that maybe people are wondering what the next Super Smash Bros. Character might be. We're waiting on that character 5 for the first fighter pass. And this is the last episode we're recording before the Game Awards for 2019. And we're wondering if another reveal may happen there. And we're at a time where people are fabricating audio leaks for Master Chief and Super Smash Bros. And we're at a crazy time. Totally random tangent aside, for posterity's sake, where are you at with that last Super Smash Bros. Reveal? Because you have your show Smash to Pieces, where you're doing that casual walkthrough, the characters in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and as DLC characters are added, more games are added to your podcast playlist, essentially. But where do you stand as we are right before the Game Awards?
At this point, I'm not convinced there is a character number 5. I don't have a reasonable prediction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just sort of holding out for Kiryu at this point. That's all I'm going for. That's the only thing I can cling to.
I think that's fair. I think with all the different talking heads, I think it is a bit silly to pin down one character. Unless, if you know, and we know people who know, and they're saying it's shocking, that it's a big deal. So that's exciting. And I'm certainly looking forward to Thursday night, the 12th, to see what comes of it. I think I'm just down to like a list of characters that I would be floored by. Totally over the moon with. I think Kiryu's one of them from Yakuza. I think Phoenix Wright is another one from the Ace Attorney series. And the more that people start talking and goes on, and some people may knock it, but whether it's this one or in Character Pack 2, I think if Sora somehow happens from Kingdom Hearts, like that may be one of the last like over the moon, unite the United States and Japan kind of characters. If Disney can play along well with Nintendo, and we saw Marvel Ultimate Alliance make it as a Switch exclusive, so there's some odd precedent there, I guess. I don't know. I think it's like those 3 characters I'd just be totally blown away by that have a realistic possibility, but I think it's just you kind of have to document, like, it's an exciting time for all of the leaks that have happened with these Super Smash Bros. Characters. I don't know. It's not exciting.
We're planning on potentially streaming the Game Awards for NWR, I believe. Me, you, and Matt, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so check out Nintendo World Report on that night if you want to possibly see our reactions.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
So let's get into, first, we have a couple quick headlines from our composers that we've followed and talked about throughout this show, and our composer follow-up headlines. We start with Prescription for Sleep. This is Norihiko Hibino and Ayaki, they combine for this group called Gentle Love, and they do these covers of video game soundtracks that are more like slow jazz, calming piano, like meant to help people relax and sleep. And so there's a new album from Gentle Love, and it's Prescription for Sleep, Shovel Knight. That is out today. If you'd like to hear, the Shovel Knight soundtrack kind of remixed in this way, definitely recommend that one.
Yeah, they're all on Spotify, actually. I learned this very shortly after doing the Yakuza 2 episode. So that's cool. It's a whole series. They've got one based on Undertale.
Celeste, even, I think?
Yeah, I believe Celeste was the most recent one before this. So yeah, definitely check that out if you are looking for music to sleep to. Also, Stardew Valley got an update. It's 1.4 update, which added a ton of stuff, including new music, which was released as a sort of separate album on both Bandcamp and Spotify, and maybe other services, but those are the two that I'm familiar with. And it's pretty good. I would like to give a special shout out to Movie Theater. Because I just sort of think it's the standout track in what was added. So definitely go check that out. More Eric Barone goodness.
Yeah, some fun tooling away on the piano there from Concerned Ape.
And with that, I think it's time to go ahead and jump into what is sure to be I think, a very good episode.
We've had some good research pulled together for both of these games. It should be fun.
So let's go ahead and start with my game, which is Final Fantasy X. Now, Final Fantasy X was originally released on July 19th, 2001 for the PlayStation 2 in Japan. It would see a North American release the same year on December 17th, and then it would see a PAL release, that's Europe and Australia, in May of 2002. It is a JRPG. We've talked about a Final Fantasy game before on the show. We talked about Final Fantasy VI a couple months ago. And as the name would suggest, it's the 10th entry in the Final Fantasy franchise. One of the most popular RPG franchises in, video games, just in general. And this one was kind of a major upgrade for the series. In a ton of ways. Let's see. It was brought to what at the time was the next generation of consoles. The PlayStation 2 released in 2000. And this was, 1 year after that. So that was a big deal. It is in full 3D. The first Final Fantasy to do so. Because even though 7, 8, and 9 on the PlayStation 1 had already moved to using 3D models for the characters, backgrounds were still pre-rendered. If you don't know what pre-rendered means, it basically means they were still 2D images that the characters were quote-unquote walking around on. But in Final Fantasy X, they were able to do a fully modeled and realized 3D world that the player could interact with. Because, the PlayStation 2 could do that without melting. It's got full voice acting, which, boy, we'll get into that. That'll be really fun. Look forward to that. But, that was also a series first. That was back when video games were starting to get into the everything is voice acted section.
For better or for worse.
For better or for worse. Final Fantasy X is infamous for its English dub. And I can't wait to get into why, because I learned some things. In Final Fantasy X, you take control of a young man named Tidus, who is a star athlete, who plays the sport of blitzball. In my game, his name was Ramples, but I will spare you all and not call him that for this episode. But I need everybody to know that he's the only character you get to name, and I named him Ramples. Blitzball is I want to describe it as it's rugby soccer, but underwater.
Yeah.
Played in a big sphere of water. And that's the best description I can think of. It's cool on paper. And and it's cool in cutscenes, but playing it in game sucks.
It does.
It's really bad. I know you're listening to this, Kyle, my friend, but I don't like it. I don't like blitzball.
It's like one of those things like these made-up sports, almost like with Harry Potter and Quidditch, right? You think they should find some way to translate it to be really cool to play it in a video game. It's not.
I mean, I love Quidditch World Cup. I will be the first to tell you that game sucks. So yeah, that's a very good, a very good comparison. I think the game is cool in concept, and they've talked about adding it to other Final Fantasy games, such as Final Fantasy XIV. They've actually talked about adding that as a minigame to that, which I'd be interested to see what they could do on modern hardware now.
Or just how the community for 14 being an online game rallies around it.
See, I think that would kind of be fun, because as it is, in-game, a lot of playing Blitzball is spent not playing Blitzball. So, I feel like this would be a lot more fun online. Titus, or Titus, whichever way you say it, I personally pronounce it Titus. They never say it in-game, because he is a character you get to name. So, it's kind of like in Persona, where they refer to him as pronouns and not by name. But he lives in the technological city of Zanarkand, where he is a local celebrity because he is so good at Blitzball. But one night, while he's playing a game, the city is attacked by a massive creature known as Sin, who proceeds to destroy the city and kill all of its inhabitants, except for Titus, who is flung into another world. He wakes up in some ruins of some sort of temple, where he is captured by a group of people speaking a language that he does not recognize, and who introduce themselves as a group of people known as the Albed. And from a girl named Riku, who appears to be the only one on the ship that, speaks his language. I don't want to say English, because it's not really. I don't know what it's supposed to be, but it's not Albed. She explains that, he's basically been thrown 1,000 years in the future, it seems, because Zanarkand was destroyed 1,000 years ago and is now used as a holy site for the local religion. The world is now known as Spira, because it's a spiral. There's no other reason. It's a spiral. And in Spira, people are still being terrorized by Sin. And in fact, very shortly after arriving, Titus has another encounter with Sin that sends him to the tropical island of Besaid, where he meets another team of Blitzball players led by a local named Waka, who is, fun fact, voiced by John DiMaggio. You may recognize him as Bender from Futurama or Jake the Dog from Adventure Time. And after showing off Titus's great athletic skills, Waka's like, "Hey, yo, my team sucks. Please join it so we can win just one game. We just want to win one game.
And then I'll retire."
And then I'll retire. And that's how Titus ends up among this group of people going on a pilgrimage alongside a newly appointed summoner named Yuna. See, in the world of Spira, summoners go on a pilgrimage to acquire aeons, which are what they call summons in this game. So stuff like Ifrit and Shiva and that kind of thing. And they do this pilgrimage in order to get the final aeon, which will allow them to defeat Sin and begin what is called the Calm until Sin reawakens once more and begins terrorizing the land and causes the need for more summoners to have to make this pilgrimage. And Yuna is hoping to be the next one to defeat Sin, following in the footsteps of her father Braska, who was the one who defeated Sin 10 years prior. Joining her is, of course, Titus and Waka, but also a warrior from the cat-like Ronso race named Kimari, and a black mage named Lulu, who is the best, both in terms of usefulness and just character. They are also eventually joined by Orin, a man who had traveled with Yuna's father previously, serving as one of his guardians, and was also friends with Tidus's father, mysteriously enough. And also Riku, the Albed girl that had helped Tidus shortly after he arrived in Spira. So the story basically goes, will Yuna and party be able to successfully complete her pilgrimage and defeat Sin? Or is there something more to the Church of Yevon, the religion that basically has a chokehold on all of Spira? Will Tidus ever be able to go back to Zanarkand and stop whining? You'll have to play to find out. The answer is he won't stop whining. I'm just going to spoil that. He won't stop whining.
Also, how does Auron know Tidus's father if Tidus has been thrown 1,000 years into the future?
Mysteries!
Everyone's been wondering that ever since you mentioned it.
Yes, it's a lot of mysteries and a lot of intrigue, and also Tidus whines a lot. So, in terms of gameplay, it plays pretty much exactly like you would expect a Final Fantasy game to play, except for one key difference. Battles are no longer fought using the ATB, or Active Time Battle system. So if you remember back when we talked about Final Fantasy VI, that game uses ATB, which is everything is happening in sort of real time, and you, instead of like being turn-based, you have to wait for a character's time gauge to fill up, and then they can do an action. Final Fantasy X is the first game since Final Fantasy IV to have tossed that out. And basically, it moves to what is called a CTB, the Conditional Turn-Based Battle System. And as you might guess, that means that battles in Final Fantasy X are completely turn-based. A string of pictures on the side of the screen will tell you the exact order that everybody's going to go in. That includes all of your party members and the enemies. And you can even switch characters out at any point. And it doesn't use up a turn. It's the best. I love the battle system in Final Fantasy X. And like certain actions will also cause it to, like, you can do like delay attack. That's one of Tidus's main moves, is he can hit an enemy and it'll push their attack down a few slots and let somebody else go first. It's really cool. I think it's the best battle system in any Final Fantasy game. And I love it. But yeah, this was a departure for the series. Another unique aspect of Final Fantasy X is the replacement of a traditional level up system with the Sphere Grid, which I don't know how to describe in words. It is a series of like interconnected nodes that you move along throughout the game, and each node will basically buff one stat of that character or give them an ability or something like that. And it's actually incredibly satisfying to fill out. And I really like the Sphere Grid, and that's one of the main things that I think Final Fantasy X is most known for, is the Sphere Grid.
Mm-hmm.
So after all of that, what are your experiences with Final Fantasy X?
I've played about 8 hours of it. So I got a little bit into the game. I finished a couple dungeons, something like that. I think I might have been like in the desert where I kind of fell off playing it. So I have enough experience playing it and gathering the party members and the Sphere Grid and the battle system. But it's also one of those games where if you learn about video games for a long time, you definitely learn a lot of spoilery aspects of different games, and this is certainly one of them. So I am not, in the dark on what happens throughout the story of Final Fantasy X. But yeah, as far as actually playing it, probably about 8 hours or so into it.
So if you were in the desert, I believe that means you had the full party.
I think I did, yes.
You would have gotten Riku right before that.
Yes, just before that.
And so I'm currently playing it. Not like currently as in like while we're recording. That would be ridiculous. But so for 2 years, I dragged my friend Kyle through Persona 5. And then after that, I was like, all right, you get to pick the game that I play now. And in fact, you get to pick like the next 2 games that I play now. And he picked Final Fantasy X. Because it's one of his favorite games of all time. He played it a lot as a kid, and I had never played it, despite owning the HD remaster for about 4 years, basically since it came out. He's been guiding me through it. He's been my Sherpa. I have not beaten it yet, though we are at the point where I could go fight the final boss if I wanted to. So within the next 2 weeks, I will have beaten Final Fantasy X. It will be my first Final Fantasy game ever. Unless So 7 and 10 are both in the running to be my first Final Fantasy game beaten ever. Considering this week I might be blitzing my way through the rest of Final Fantasy VII. We'll have to see. But yeah, it's been very good so far, actually. I think it has a lot of flaws. Blitzball being one of them. Tidus being the biggest one. But overall, I do think like it's a very good game. And I'm very happy to have finally played it. And I do think that while I don't agree with some of the people that are like, it's one of the best games ever made. I don't agree with that. I do think that it is a very notable game and does deserve a lot of the praise that is earned.
Yeah, and especially like a very good soundtrack. I mean, I'm not going to say it was difficult to, pick out this Critical 5 or whatever for us. Because, behind the scenes, inside baseball, as we say, right? But, there are 4 tracks that we just like...
Those are in.
They have to be in. Like, you can't mess with them. It's such a well-defined soundtrack that these are just so famous. And then we're like hemming and hawing about a 5th, and it's like, you know what? This one probably should, because this is kind of like a remake of another. It's a really strong Critical 5, and then even for the cutting room floor, it's like good ones to flesh out. But yeah, a very good Final Fantasy soundtrack in a lineage of games that has tremendous music.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's been a very fun experience going through this game, especially laughing at some of the goofier stuff in the game. Because, I mean, it's still a product of 2001, and it's got a lot of funny problems with its localization. Noted, though, the one issue that people point to, the scene that people point to, like, look how bad this voice acting is the wrong one to point to. Because everybody goes for the ha 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 scene. That's supposed to be stupid. It's supposed to be goofy and bad.
Yeah, you take it out of context and it's gonna seem weird.
It's him pretending to laugh when he's when everything has gone very poorly for him. And he's not actually supposed to be laughing. He is forcing laughing, and that's what it sounds like. And I think that is actually very well done, that scene. Not that it still doesn't sound really funny when you pull it out of context. So, let's get into the development of Final Fantasy X. It began in 1999, eventually costing upwards of 4 billion yen, which Wikipedia told me is the equivalent of $48.6 million in 2018. In 2018 money. I couldn't figure out 2019 money. I figured 2018 is close enough. Sure. Inflation hasn't gone up that high yet. And the team was made up of over 100 people, most of them being serious veterans that had worked on previous Final Fantasy games. Now, one thing that really got me about it being starting development in 99 is because Final Fantasy VIII was the game that came out in 1999.
Yeah.
Which means that this game had started development hot off the heels of that game's release. And then I was like, wait, then what about 9? And it turns out 9 started development in 97.
Oh.
2 full years before Final Fantasy VIII came out. And so at a certain point, they had 3 Final Fantasy games in development at the same time.
Wow.
So I found that really, really funny. And also, this explains some things about character design that we'll get into in a bit with our good friend, whom we have talked about in the past. So, as for the actual development of the game, Hironobu Sakaguchi, who we have also talked about before, both in terms of Final Fantasy, and he was mentioned in Chrono Trigger because he was part of that game's development as well. He was the executive producer of 10 and had worries about the transition from 2D backgrounds to 3D because, like, why wouldn't you? It's new. What if it goes horribly, horribly wrong? And it was like, if they were using the PS1 as their baseline, like 3D games, fully 3D games in the PS1 era were rough. Real rough. So, like, I can't blame him for worrying about that, but he apparently also had the same sort of worries about adding voice acting into the game. But overall, like, these things he believes worked out really well because, in his opinion, the Final Fantasy team really, really thrives on trying new things and challenging themselves and doing stuff that they've never done before. And that's usually like a sign of a team that really enjoys what they're doing. And I don't know how many of these people like would continue working on the Final Fantasy franchise. That kind of information is just, it takes a ton of digging to get that in the video game industry, especially for a huge franchise like this. But it does seem like from 10 on, they did continually be like, all right, how can we change it up this time? Like, 12 does not play like 10, and 13 does not play like 12, and 15 does not play like 13, and so on and so forth.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so I think that's a really good sign that at that point they were like, well, we're off the PS1. Let's try new stuff. Let's mix it up. And I know a lot of people don't like the games after 10 because they mix it up so hard. But I honestly think it's very respectable that they do that, personally. The script for the game apparently took 4 months to write, and then they spent another 4 full months just focused on recording the voice acting to make sure it was just right. Because again, this is something they'd never done before, so I imagine they wanted to make sure it was done right. And the writer, Kazushige Nojima, says that his main concern was making sure the players still had a connection to the main character, Tidus, and therefore decided to write the story in a way that meant, quote, the player's progress was reflected in Tidus's own understanding of the world around him. I'm sorry, dude, you didn't nail it. I hate Tidus so much. He's one of the worst protagonists in any video game I've ever played. And that's not a hot take. Most people will agree with me on that. Tidus sucks. This dude was not a stranger to writing Final Fantasy games. He was one of the writers of 7 and 8, and he would later go on to help write for the Kingdom Hearts series. But like, I don't know, man, you missed the mark on this one a little bit. Every other character is fine. I like all the other characters in Final Fantasy X.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He sucks. Tidus sucks. He is bad. Now on to the character design thing that I said would come up in a minute. This was yet another game in the series with characters designed by our old friend Tetsuya Nomura.
Hey.
Who had gotten his start working on the series as a debugger on Final Fantasy IV. And then he had started doing character designs with Final Fantasy VI. And he had done every game from there except for 9, which explains a lot. Because 9's character designs are completely different from 7, 8, and 10.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
So that explains everything. And that makes sense, because he would have been working on 10 at the time. So, all right. And now for another tangent. Hey, man, these character designs are the dumbest Nomura has ever done. Nomura nowadays is famous for he works mainly on Kingdom Hearts, but he has also dabbled back into Final Fantasy with stuff like 15, and he is also the head of the remake of Final Fantasy VII. These are some of the dumbest designs he's ever done, and that's saying something. I have in my notes, I'm going to just read word for word what I wrote in my notes. Tidus looks like his mom let him dress himself for the first time that morning. Wakka's hair is absolutely ridiculous. Everything about Seymour is offensive to my eyes. And I love you, Lulu, but your dress is made of belts.
That's all accurate and fair, yeah.
And there are, of course, exceptions. I love Yuna. Her design is nice. I do love her cool little robes and her little hair thing and all that. Orin has a super cool design that I would not trade for the world. He's a badass. He's awesome. And the entire Ronso tribe is great. I love them. They look fantastic. But, like, those 4 examples, though, like, most people don't realize that that's what Lulu's dress is. It's literally made of belts. Like, from top to bottom, she's wearing at least 100 belts.
Like, people give Kingdom Hearts characters crap because of belts and Nomura's designs. No, Lulu.
It's Lulu. Lulu is, like, I feel like after 10, somebody reined him in. In terms of world design, the team also had to make a conscious choice to avoid a medieval European fantasy setting because they sort of looked at that and were like, everybody's done that. All of our games are that. Can we do something else? Because they had either done medieval European for most of the games, or like a steampunk sort of setting for like parts of 6 and then all of 7. And 8 was like just more modern fantasy. It was weird. And so they decided to go for a world with Asian influences instead, because strangely enough, this was not something that Japanese fantasy RPGs did all that often. And then, of course, Nomura himself states that the South Pacific, the islands of the South Pacific, Thailand, and Japan were the specific influences that they decided to use for how Spira would turn out looking in the end.
Yeah, I've never thought about it before, but that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. I also, now that I'm like thinking about it, yeah, that makes perfect sense, especially the Thailand thing. Apparently, originally, the enemies were meant to be visibly wandering on the world map, and the transition into battle was apparently going to be seamless. Like, you were going to go run up to an enemy, and then you were in a fight. This didn't work out because it was on the PlayStation 2, and the PS2 can't do that. We had a very similar story with Persona 3. Its original prototype had the enemies wandering on the map, which that stuck around in Persona 3, but the seamless transition into battle definitely did not. And so instead of the wandering enemies, Final Fantasy X just uses the usual random encounter system that we are all very big fans of. And then also, Nomura states that the characters from the different regions of Spira were intentionally designed to look very distinct from each other. So, like, one of the examples he brought up was the Albed, look very weird and eccentric with their goggles and their weird clothing. And look, mission accomplished. But at what cost? They all look so dumb. Like, some of the clothing in this game makes me wonder if up to that point Nomura had ever seen a human being wearing clothes. Because I don't think he has. He finds a way to one-up Araki of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure fame on his weird fashion choices. It's bizarre. But also he does bring up, like, the Ronso are specifically dressed because they're a warrior race, and they are dressed in clothing that would allow them to move freely during battle. That kind of thing. I thought that was kind of cool. Apparently, the specific cutscene that gave the developers the most trouble in writing and producing was the famous pre-rendered scene of Tidus and Yuna having a romantic moment in a pond, which is it's a very beautifully animated scene for 2001. A lot of people really, really enjoy that scene. Apparently, it had to be remade multiple times just because of the negative response from the female staffers on the team. And just because they say, like, we'd never done a romance scene like that before. We didn't know what we were doing. And, God.
It's like, have you ever kissed a woman before?
Like, Oh, that gave me life to learn. Like, I want to see the original drafts.
Yes. Oh my god.
I want to see them so bad. And we never will. Square's never. I would be surprised if they still exist anywhere.
Oh. Yeah, no.
But speaking of cutscenes, they also, for these cutscenes, featured this newfangled technology at the time being facial motion capture. For the first time in series history. And I think, like, it was one of the earlier games to really, really do it. Because this was around the time when the gaming industry was like, yeah, no. This is a thing. We should do this. Because, you know, on the PS1, human faces were just pixels stretched on a polygon. And on the 64, they were photographs stretched over a model. So, like, we didn't have a lot of use for that kind of thing up to this point. So they decided they were going to do the facial capture so that the characters would have realistic lip movement when they spoke. And it worked just great. One problem. These fancy realistic lip flaps were specifically made for the Japanese dialogue. And they were hard-coded into the game.
Oh no.
So, the localization team, when it came time to put the game into English, could not change them. This meant that not only did they have to translate and localize the dialogue into English phrases that made sense, but they also had to make sure that those phrases and lines matched up to the rhythm of the Japanese lip flaps, which explains a lot, but not as much as the next item on the list, being that, in case that wasn't enough, the cherry on top is that there was a bug that if the new sound file exceeded the length of the old sound file at all, the game would crash.
That's incredible.
And they could not fix it. So, this explains so much. This explains why one of my favorite line reads in the entire game is somebody telling Tidus, you can't go in there, it's forbidden, and he goes, like I care. Like, reads it the fastest line read I've ever heard in my entire life, and it's because if it was any longer, the game would have crashed. That explains so much. So, basically, they had to make sure that the English line made sense, that the line read at least sort of matched the lip sync, because they've done studies that are like, people in Japan, they don't really care all that much about like dialogue matching up to lip syncing, but but we care. In America, we care immensely. It puts us off. It pulls us out if they don't.
We're so used to, you know, Hollywood production and all that, and everything's in English that if it's not catered to our whims, it's like disorienting. Yeah.
Yeah. But then they also had to make sure that the sound files were either shorter or the exact same length as the Japanese dialogue. Oh, it also explains why whenever Yuna says the word yes, it sounds like they cut it out of a different line. She was like, yes, yes, yes. And it's because it had to match up with height.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That makes so much sense now. One of the localizers actually has a quote describing how it felt to try and fit natural sounding English dialogue into this game as, quote, something akin to writing 4 or 5 movies worth of dialogue entirely in haiku form.
Oh, jeez.
So, localizing this game sounds like it was a nightmare. And I have never read anything in my life that I could make more of an immediate connection to and just go, oh, that explains everything.
Mm-hmm.
How have I never heard of that before?
I hadn't either. That's amazing.
You'd think that'd be a bigger, like, localization story, especially with how big this game is. Upon release, Square apparently did not have super high hopes for the game. They were hoping that it would sell 2 million copies worldwide. That was their sales goal. Because they were pretty sure, like, PS2 is new. It doesn't have as big of an install base. We cannot expect it to sell as much as 7, 8, or 9 did. Except, within 4 days of release in Japan, it had already sold 1.4 million copies on pre-orders alone. So, they underestimated that, and that was before it even left Japan. I will restate. That's a lot of games, and that's like an immediate crushing of sales goals, pretty much from out the gate. From there, Final Fantasy X would go on to be the first PlayStation 2 game to hit both 2 million and 4 million copies sold. As of 2007, it was the 8th highest selling game for the console at 5 million copies, beating out Metal Gear Solid 3 and Final Fantasy 12, and being beaten only by the original Kingdom Hearts, Metal Gear Solid 2, 2 Gran Turismo games, and 3 Grand Theft Auto games. According to Square, as of 2017, the PS2 version, specifically the PS2 version, had sold over 8 million copies worldwide.
Wow.
So yeah, the game did real well. It was incredibly well received by critics as well, with a current Metacritic sitting at 92. And it was voted best game of all time by readers of Famitsu in 2006. It's often included on lists of, like, not only just the best PS2 games, but some of the best games ever made. And it would receive a direct sequel in 2003, creatively called Final Fantasy X-2, which is just as confusing as it sounds. And this sequel puts the player in control of Yuna, as she travels Spira alongside Riku and a new character named Pain 2 years after the events of the original game. And this sequel, considerably less well received by fans, though there are still many fans of this game, such as my roommate, Ben. It's his favorite Final Fantasy game. Unironically. And then child versions of Tidus and Waka would make an appearance in Kingdom Hearts as residents of the Destiny Isles, alongside the character Selphie from Final Fantasy VIII. And then in 2, Auron, Yuna, and Riku, as well as Pain from X-2, would appear in the sequel, Kingdom Hearts 2, with Auron specifically being a party member in Olympus Coliseum, which I assume... are you like me? Was that your first experience with Auron?
I think it was, yes. I knew he was from 10, but, like, first time ever actually, like, playing a game with him in it, yes.
Yeah, I had never heard of him before, and he was super cool, and I'm glad I've finally seen him in his own game. And then, both Final Fantasy X and Final Fantasy X-2 were released as a bundle, in an HD remaster in 2013, which can currently be played on PS3, PS Vita, PS4, PC, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One. So you can basically get it on everything now. Which it comes with a not fully reorchestrated, but a reorchestrated soundtrack.
Oh, it's one of the coolest things about that game when it came out, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I don't think they reorchestrated every song in the game, but they reorchestrated the important stuff. And it's very good. So in terms of talking about the music of Final Fantasy X, the head composer was, of course, Nobuo Uematsu. But we've already talked about Uematsu, so we're going to talk about one of the other composers that worked on this project, Masashi Hamauzu. So Hamauzu was born on September 20th, 1971 in Munich, West Germany, to a piano teacher mother and an opera singer father. And for this reason, he, from a very young age, was already doing piano and singing lessons. And I guess by the time he hit high school, he had already composed his first original piece of music. And then his little brother was born. And his parents, I guess, decided to take that opportunity to move to Japan, where they specifically moved to Osaka. And at this point, Hamauzu decided that he was going to enroll at the Tokyo National University of Fine Arts and Music, with a focus on building his skills as a pianist. And it was there that he met Matsue Fukishi, who he would eventually marry. So now she is Matsue Hamauzu. She, fun fact, as a side note, apparently served as a soprano on the Final Fantasy VII soundtrack, being part of One Winged Angel, and she is also a soprano on the soundtrack of Final Fantasy VIII, and is also the lead vocalist on Final Fantasy XIII.
Oh, neat. So is she part of Liberi Fatali in 8?
It didn't mention what song she did in 8, and I assume it also didn't mention what song she was part of in 7.
But yeah,
I assume One Winged Angel, because what else would it be?
Yeah, how many songs have actually vocals to them?
But yeah, it didn't actually mention any songs by name.
It's so cool, though.
Apparently, upon graduation, he thought, like, maybe I should become a classical musician. Now, I want to write game music. And being a fan of Final Fantasy, he applied at Square and was hired by an impressed Nobuo Uematsu himself in 1996. And his very first solo project was in 1997, the game Chocobo no Fushigina Dungeon, which I imagine it doesn't have its own Wikipedia article, but I imagine that's one of the Chocobo dungeon games. I would assume from the name.
Yeah.
And he would also go on to provide bass vocals for One Winged Angel in Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, neat.
So he was also part of that song.
So another thread I'll mention later. Composers who provide vocals in the games that they work on. Interesting.
He also became the head of Square Enix's music team in 2004 after Uematsu departed from the company. But in 2010, he followed Uematsu's footsteps, and he also left Square Enix. He has since founded his own personal label called Mono Music, that is with a K. And according to him, this label is just for his music. It's not really for anybody else. It's for him. And I imagine probably also his wife, if I had to guess. It didn't mention that, but if I had to guess, his wife can probably get in on that action if she wants. But he is still, every once in a while, brought in to do music for Square Enix games when they can get him. So as for his discography, his very first game ever was on Front Mission Gun Hazard, which Front Mission is Square's very not often used mech series, basically, from what I understand. And then he also worked on the game Tobal No. 1, which I still don't know what that game is, but he did the soundtrack of that game alongside a bunch of other composers, including previous subjects Yasunori Mitsuda and Yoko Shimomura. So I figured that was worth mentioning.
Yeah.
He was the head composer on Final Fantasy VII Dirge of Cerberus. Sorry. And was the head composer, the sole composer for Final Fantasy XIII, which, honestly, that should honestly be the game we brought for Hamauzu.
Yeah.
But we're still we'll bring that up eventually still. It'll just be a repeat.
Sure. Like that's a great soundtrack. I mean, Blinded by Light. One of the best songs, certainly of that album. I mean, yeah, that's a classic.
But he was also a contributor to 13.2 and Lightning Returns. He was a contributor to World of Final Fantasy, and he also did 2 remixes for Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, being the remix of Green Green's version 2 and the stage select theme from Pikmin 2. So, I don't have a lot for historical development research about this soundtrack itself, but this is the first game in the series where Nobuo Uematsu was not the sole composer. And he had help in creating the soundtrack for the first time in series history. And alongside Hamauzu, they also brought in Junya Nakano to assist with this game's soundtrack. Both of them were apparently chosen because they were both deemed to be able to create something different from Uematsu's style while also being able to work well with him. And it should be noted that while Hamauzu is who we focused on for this section, literally every single track we're about to talk about was from Uematsu.
Oops. Sorry.
So let's jump into it, I guess. And there is literally no other track we can start with when talking about the soundtrack of this game than Xanarkand. By far the most famous song out of this game. Like, with a bullet. Even if you don't think you've heard this song, you've probably heard this song. It is a gorgeous piano piece. It's one of the first things you hear upon starting up a new game. And it gets me every time I hear it. I consider this like the secondary main theme of the game, because there is an actual song that is considered the main theme of Final Fantasy X. But I don't know. I think this one holds that title a bit more than the other one.
I agree. Yeah, such a classic piano piece. You may hear this title as To Xanarkand or At Xanarkand. Xanarkand is like the main way you hear this title. But yeah, used so many different places, whether purposefully or ironically, and it's great. One of the best for this, for sure.
We used it once for something.
Yep.
There was a video of me getting put in makeup. And at the end, one of my favorite little montages that has ever come out of anything I've been involved with is a montage of me while Xanarkand plays on top of it.
It is perfect.
And for a complete departure from that, let's talk about our second track, Otherworld.
Go now, if you want it, another one awaits you. Don't you give up on it, you burn the head that feeds you. Alone, confuse your wonder, memories of it, cloud your sight, build your dreams.
What the hell is this song? Like, no, really, what the hell is this song?
Complete polar opposites. We're talking about the spectrum of Final Fantasy X.
Like, this is the one to bring up, I guess.
But in case if people were wondering, like, this is the one we kind of had to battle to fit in that fifth spot. So, just pointing it out there.
So, this song plays while Xanarkand is being destroyed at the beginning of the game. And the vocals were done by a man named Bill Muir. I believe that's how it's pronounced. M-U-I-R is his last name. I hated this song when I first heard it. And then the next 10 times I heard it, I still hated it. But for some reason, like, recently, I'm like, no, actually, this is a weirdly good song. It's grown on me so heavily, but it's such a stupid song. It's so dumb. There's one part, though, where, like, it goes into, like, a monologue during the song that, like, a radio, like somebody's reading a speech off of a radio.
Yeah.
I really like that part. That part's super cool. But yeah, no, this song's really dumb.
It's the dumbest until it turns on you. And then it fits, and it's really cool. But yeah, totally different than anything else.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any other song on the entire soundtrack that sounds like this.
I don't think even it took until like Final Fantasy XIV for there to be another song that goes as hard as this.
It's kind of nuts. So let's reel it back in and get back into some fantasy music real quick with the battle theme. might be among my favorite battle themes in Final Fantasy series. I think it's definitely up there.
Yes.
Especially with that opening with the dun 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 dun. It's just and the orchestrated version in the HD remaster, absolutely fantastic.
Kills it. Yeah.
And just it's got this really great energy to it. It's this bombastic song that really makes you feel like, yeah, we're doing this. Sure, I fought this same enemy 6 times in the past 3 minutes, but yeah, we're doing it. I didn't start getting sick of this song until near the end of the game, when I got very happy for being able to equip an item that turned off random encounters.
Yeah, I think Blinded by Light from 13 and this song are like 2 Final Fantasy battle tracks that I could just listen to on loop. Take that back. There's a couple from 15 as well. But so good. And you're right. I mean, the difference between the original and the HD remaster soundtrack is a marked improvement. Not that the original is bad that we play here for you, but to have all of the instruments be a little more realistic is a real nice touch.
Yeah, and honestly, I think because Blinded by Light is very good, and I really, really like that song. I agree. It's among my favorites as well. I really like Let the Battles Begin, but that might just be Stockholm Syndrome at this point. And not that song's not good, it's just it being among my favorites might actually legitimately be Stockholm Syndrome at this point. But I think, yeah, I agree. It's between this and Blinded by Light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, Hamauzu was involved with both of them. He didn't write this one. This was, again, Uematsu. But, fitting that he was involved with both games. After that, we have what is actually considered the main theme of Final Fantasy X, Steki Dane. So the lyrics for this song were written by Kazushige Nojima, who, if you remember, was the head writer of the game, and composed. The music was composed by Nobuo Uematsu, of course, and vocals were actually done by the Japanese singer Riki. And like I said, this is the main theme of Final Fantasy X. Its name translates to "Isn't It Wonderful?" And it's probably the second most famous song to come out of the game, I think. The battle theme is probably number 3, but I think this has a very hard spot as number 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it starts playing during the big emotional romance scene that they had so much trouble writing. And it continues a tradition that was started in Final Fantasy VIII of having a vocal theme play during scenes like that, and also having the main theme of the game be a vocal theme, because I don't think any game has dropped that tradition since. So, like, Final Fantasy VIII started it with Eyes on Me, and Final Fantasy IX continued it with... I don't remember what Final Fantasy IX is called off the top of my head anymore. I should, but I don't. And then you have this one. And a funny story that I found while researching is that apparently... they told a website, Square Enix told a website that the song had been completed as of November of 2000. The main theme of Final Fantasy X was done and recorded and all that. And so when GameSpot personally asked Uematsu, hey, who's singing the main theme of Final Fantasy X? He jokingly responded by telling them it would be the British artist Rod Stewart. So I found that kind of funny. I don't know who Rod Stewart is because I'm woefully misinformed about music.
Yeah, 80s pop star for sure.
But yeah, I found that really funny that Uematsu was like, oh yeah, it's this guy.
It's not the same exact voice, but it's a similar-ish voice. I'm just imagining like Michael Bolton singing.
And it's still in Japanese. It's still in Japanese.
Yeah. Of course. But yeah, you also get, as this being the main theme, you get a lot of other songs in this game just being like instrumental versions where it's gonna come up a bit in this game.
It's a leitmotif you hear a lot throughout the soundtrack. And then our final track on the Critical 5 is Fight with Seymour.
Oh, I love this one. I love it. I love it so much.
It's super, super good. This is the battle theme for the game's main antagonist, Seymour, who is a maester in the Church of Yevon. And look, he may have the worst antagonist design the series has ever seen, but I'll be damned if his song doesn't jam super hard.
Oh, yeah.
And it reminds me of Genova a lot, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the start especially just reminds me completely of Genova. But maybe Seymour's all right if his song's gonna be this good. I wish he'd cut off his stupid hair antlers though. That's all I ask.
Yeah, this one's awesome. Some people may think it gets a little repetitive, especially with some of the driving beats to it. But when you get that organ going, man, like it gives me like dancing mad flashbacks, and any song that can do that is pretty awesome.
I would agree, and also like the sort of, it's a MIDI chorus, but like there's a vocal aspect to it that comes in at the beginning.
Yes,
and it's so good. This song is so good.
This soundtrack in particular is one where it's like, it's tough to pick just 30 seconds. And we're like trying to pick the best 30 here. But definitely give these songs a listen. Like this one, especially.
Absolutely. So, for tracks on the cutting room floor, we both have 2. Hit me with yours.
My first one is Via Purifico. Sometimes this is also titled Path of Repentance. This is just a captivating piano piece, so I know you'll like it and appreciate it. But this plays during the dungeon of the same name, Via Purifico, and it's below the city of Bevel. But yeah, I mean, it's just a spellbinding solo piano piece. Love it. The other one is Calm Before the Storm. This one's also titled The Silence Before the Storm, so Calm Before the Storm makes sense in a more localized translation. This is the theme of Kilika Woods. This is also heard at Macalania Woods, the Cavern of the Stolen Faith, and also Mount Gagazet's Cave. So it plays in a whole bunch of different places, and for whatever reason, like even the little bit I played of the game with 8 hours or so, this one, like, played this one, flipping through the different songs. It's like, oh yeah, like this one really resonates with me in my experience playing it. I think especially for Kilika Woods there. So yeah, that's why I wanted to include this one as well.
Macalania is especially like a really memorable area because it's beautiful. That area is actually really pretty. It's like a crystally sort of forest. It's super great. For me, the song that I was struggling between it and Otherworld is Spira Unplugged. The song can also be found online as Spirian Scenery, and it's just an acoustic guitar rendition of Steki Dane, hence why it's here and not in the Critical 5. That's where we kind of like landed of like, Unplugged is just sort of, it's just the main theme again. It would probably go better in the Cutting Room Floor, and that makes sense to me. But, like, I think this is among one of my favorite songs in the entire game. Honestly. It's just it's peaceful, and it's really nice to listen to, and I really enjoy it.
It's got a good, like, slap rhythm to it, too.
And then, a song that I think we can't not mention is Hymn of the Faith. Song is also known as Hum of the Faith or Song of Prayer. You're going to hear this song a lot in Final Fantasy X. It plays when you're in a temple, usually right before you're about to get a new Aeon. And actually, when you're actually in the chamber for the Aeons, every Aeon has its own version of this song, even. That is, I guess, meant to be sung by the warrior that became that faith. So that's really cool, I think. And I think that this is a very notable song and bears mentioning. Again, you're going to hear it a lot. Yeah,
really good selections overall. It's really a standout soundtrack for sure.
So what will I never forget about Final Fantasy X? Tidus sucks. Tidus sucks so hard. He is the worst antagonist of any game I've ever played. He's awful. But the actual answer is twofold. One, I really like Spira, and I like the battle system, and I like the music, and I think that Final Fantasy X is just a really, really good game, and I'm looking forward to finishing it. And also, I think I'll remember playing it alongside my friend, and the most memorable part of playing it alongside my friend is... I sort of lied when I said that Tidus is the only character you get to name. He's the only party member you get to name. But you get to name all of your Aeons. All of them. And so they all have really cool names like Ifrit and Bahamut and Shiva and all that stuff. Except in my game, they are named Bird, Doggo, Horsey, Goth GF, Donkey, Naruto, Mom, and I don't remember what I named the three mage sisters. I named all three of them something equally stupid. But like, every time I would get a new Aeon, I would name it something really dumb and just watch the contorted pain on my friend's face. As I did so. Naruto got him the hardest. Naming Yojimbo Naruto was the best one by far.
I could see that, yeah.
And it would just be like things where he'd be like, you should summon Bahamut for this fight. And I'd be like, I don't know who that is. And he'd just like sigh. Like, you should summon Donkey. Or like when you fight the lady who you fight her Aeons and you have to defeat her versions of the same Aeons that you have. You fight her and he'd be like, all right, she's going to summon her own Donkey. And I'm like, I doubt she calls hers Donkey, Kyle. That's not a thing. And it just, it's been so fun to make him so mad in that way. So I think that overall is the most thing I'm going to remember.
For me, I think it's a lot of the soundtrack. Like, I don't have enough gameplay experience to be like, oh, this moment hit me the hardest. But I mean, that battle theme, man, like it's catchy. It's so good. And then tracks like Fight with Seymour. I mean, yeah, are you kidding me? It's so good. So yeah, so many different songs. Like, it was easy to help contribute to this soundtrack, even though I've only played so much of it. But so yeah, that's what I won't forget.
So, for our transition, we usually like to highlight a fan cover or remix, be it from OC Remix, YouTube, what have you. Obviously, I knew what song I was going to find the easiest for this. There's really no contest. So this is a remix of To Xanarkand, a violin cover, actually. A very, very pretty violin cover. This song translates to violin super well. It is by YouTuber Taylor Davis, so give that a look. Go listen to the full version. It's gorgeous, and we will be right back.
So for another game from 2001, we're going to move from a Japanese RPG to a first-person shooter. And I don't know if there's any more like East versus West genre. You were talking about the consoles, the development studios, but also the type of game. That's also a pretty big, drastic departure. But when we're talking about Halo Combat Evolved, today, you probably know Halo as an undeniable media juggernaut. It's a franchise that has grossed more than $4.6 billion worldwide. Halo Combat Evolved was a wildly successful launch title for the original Xbox, and it helped promote and establish Microsoft as a prominent console manufacturer in the video game industry. This series also helped promote the concept of machinima, which is, machine animation using computer graphics engines as a means of cinematic production, specifically with Rooster Teeth's Red vs. Blue series. So Halo is no stranger just to the world of video games, but media beyond it. And so the original Halo Combat Evolved was released for Xbox in North America on November 15th, 2001. Europe got the game on March 14th, 2002, and a PC version that was ported by Gearbox Software was released in North America on September 30th, 2003. Halo Combat Evolved Anniversary was a high-definition remake that launched on the original game's 10-year anniversary in 2011 on Xbox 360. And this game allowed for instant toggling between old and new graphics, which was a pretty interesting thing at the time. Now, this game is most easily accessible today through Halo the Master Chief Collection, whether that's the disc version on Xbox One or even through Xbox Game Pass, the subscription service. But it's also coming to PC sometime next year. And this version of the game with the Master Chief Collection uses the anniversary version of Halo Combat Evolved. The original game developed by Bungie and published by Microsoft Game Studios. It is a first-person shooter in a 3D environment where the player attacks aliens with a variety of weapons and explosives, all while there is a cinematic story being told through cutscenes and in-game events. A third-person perspective is used when the player operates vehicles such as all-terrain vehicles, or even alien hovercraft. The plot of the original Halo Combat Evolved is that it's the 26th century, and humanity has established settlements on other planets. After an alien race called the Covenant has annihilated a human outpost on the planet Reach, the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC, they have a starship called Pillar of Autumn, and it escapes from Reach with our hero Master Chief on board. And then it crash lands on a nearby ring world with the goal that the Covenant cannot discover where the location of Earth is. Now, Master Chief, our protagonist that we take that first-person perspective of, he is a Spartan. And this is a term for an augmented super soldier. And he is also outfitted with an artificial intelligence named Cortana. So, can Master Chief help mount a successful counterattack against the Covenant? And what are the secrets behind this ring world that humanity has discovered? So, Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Halo Combat Evolved?
I don't have any. I've never owned an Xbox, and I didn't start getting big into like PC gaming. And even now, I wouldn't call myself big into PC gaming even until very recently. And so I'm kind of hoping that when they do come to PC on Game Pass, I think I will probably give them a shot because I've never played any Halo game at all. Because again, never had an Xbox. I've never owned an Xbox of any kind. And I also went through that obligatory teenage phase of Halo is not real video games.
Oh.
And look, I'll have another story about that later, but if you are listening to this, teenagers, and you find yourself also thinking that about any game, honestly, be it Fortnite, Minecraft, anything like that, do yourself a favor, kick that right away.
Yeah, there's no benefit to doing that. That's for sure. I grew up in the early 2000s, and so I had friends who had Xboxes, and they had Halo. And so, try as I may to play local multiplayer with them, I was terrible. And that's the whole twin stick thing. Like, that takes a lot to learn. That takes a long time. And it's one thing if you're exploring a 3D world with no time limit and no pressure, but it's a whole other thing entirely when your friends are shooting at you and you need to learn how to shoot as well. So that was a little tough. So it would be years since I'd even be aware that there was a story to Halo. And it's a game I have played, I've beaten in co-op. The first few Halo games, it may take like still another playthrough to really emphasize it, but like I've always gone through the fact of like, it's a weird way they tell the story and they kind of like throw and assume a lot at the player. And so for me, when I was playing through it the first time, it's just like, just show me the waypoint. I'll move there. I'll shoot enemies. I can do that much. But it's a big world with a whole bunch of lore to it. And it assumes a lot of the player and assumes a lot that you pick up on it. So like I'm not crazy about the first original game, but I think when we're eventually going to talk about a Halo soundtrack, it's pretty important to talk about like the one that started it all, especially when the subsequent sequels would borrow plenty of remixes or new takes on original tracks from the original Halo game. So this is an important one to touch on, especially when we're doing like 2001 games here and there. So the development of Halo Combat Evolved actually started in 1997, when Bungie was just a company with 15 people working together in Chicago. This was originally planned as a real-time strategy game, with a focus on realistic physics simulations and three-dimensional terrain. It was going to use the game engine for Bungie's game Myth with an isometric perspective. Eventually, this became a third-person shooter in 1998. And so, as the game became more and more of a concept, a cobbling of ideas, some higher-ups at Bungie used their personal and professional connections to get an audience with Steve Jobs at Apple. And they decided, hey, let's debut this game, which still doesn't really have a working title yet, at the Macworld Expo in 1999. And it was there that it was announced that this game would launch on PC and Mac simultaneously. Now, a Mac version of Halo Combat Evolved did eventually come out, but on December 3rd, 2003, a little more than 2 years later after the fact, and there's a very important reason for that, which we will get to. But first, we have to talk about all the names that were considered for Halo Combat Evolved, because the project originally had the working title Monkey Nuts, which is just a great title. Apparently, it eventually became Blam, with an exclamation point, B-L-A-M, Blam, after the project lead Jason Jones realized that he couldn't bring himself to tell his mother the original name of Monkey Nuts.
Beautiful.
So
beautiful.
That's just fantastic. There were other possible titles that were kind of floating around in the ether as possibilities, such as The Santa Machine, Solipsis, The Crystal Palace, Hard Vacuum, Star Maker, and Star Shield. Now, Bungie eventually hired a marketing firm who they recommended Covenant, but it was one of Bungie's artists that brought up the idea of Halo. And the team liked that idea the most, kind of giving it like this open air mystery of what the game could be, and it does tie in really well with the story, actually. But there were initial concerns about possible like religious ties with the name of Halo, or even like women's shampoo. So apparently then closer to launch, when it was going to be Halo, and Bungie did not want to change the Halo name at all, despite marketing research team pressures, the subtitle of Combat Evolved was added to make it more descriptive and have it compete better with other military-themed games of the time. So, yeah, a lot of people just call it Halo or Halo 1, but originally launched as Halo Combat Evolved. Now, here's the deal. Bungie was going through some financial struggles at the time, and so this is where Microsoft comes along and acquires Bungie on June 19th, 2000. And Microsoft says, hey, we want Halo to be the tentpole launch title for our debut console on the video game market, the Xbox. And so, goodbye, Mac launch simultaneously. That is no longer a thing. But it also meant that in less than a year, Bungie had to turn Halo from a loose collection of ideas to a shipped product on an unproven console. And then things were thrown even more into chaos because this was still a third-person shooter at the time. And Jason Jones, who didn't want to call it Monkey Nuts, decided to turn the game into a first-person shooter to have players feel more immersed in the game's events. And so development pressure just ramped up immensely because first-person shooter games on a twin-stick console gamepad were certainly very uncommon at the time and not at all a popular genre. I mean, yeah, you did have GoldenEye in the late 90s on Nintendo 64, but keep in mind what a Nintendo 64 controller was. That was not the dual analog control scheme that we know today. So Bungie originally had these grand ideas of what this game could be, or what Halo could be, like an open world game where terrain could react in real time and be deformed from explosions. There could be persistent environment details, like fired off shell casings that would remain on the ground. Variable weather. None of this made into the final project because of all the crunch that was needed to hit a release date on the original Xbox. And yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's not surprising, even slightly.
You look at that original Halo game, and it's like, yeah, it's a little rough around the edges, but it was a marvel at the time. But Bungie had big dreams, and yeah, eventually it may get there for the Halo franchise, but not in that first iteration. Local multiplayer was definitely a big thing with the success of the original Halo. But this was a time before Xbox Live multiplayer. And so it was a big thing, and still is if people play the original version, where LAN play, local area network play, was a big deal, where you got to connect all of your Xboxes up together for up to 16-player matches. It would take the PC version of the game to be released with online multiplayer to be added, and even then, like, there were different balancing issues. I think if I remember correctly, I may be mistaken, but like the pistol was even more overpowered, like in the PC version than it was in the original game. You know, correct me if I'm wrong on that. I'm sorry. But yeah, so even things like it looked better. There were sharper textures, but the performance struggled a little bit. So like the PC version is pretty well regarded. But yeah, that allowed for online multiplayer. And there were communities that were, lasting until like 2014. GameSpy were shutting down servers, and then fans kept it up somehow. So like, it's still a big deal. But Halo Combat Evolved was really the system seller for the original Xbox. I mean, especially when its sequel Halo 2 came out. My goodness. So the game apparently has a Metacritic score today of 97, which is remarkably high, but do bear in mind it's Metacritic for a game in 2001, so it's not the most accurate sort of measuring mark there. But there were games at the time, and still today, that tried to be Halo clones or Halo killers.
Every time a new first-person shooter thing came out, it's one of 2 games I know of that earned the title of blank killer. The other one being WoW.
Yeah.
Because every time for a long time, every time a new first-person shooter franchise was created, a new IP, it was like, is this so-and-so company's Halo killer? Is this finally going to be the one? And of course, Call of Duty, as we know, ended up being the one eventually. But that took years. And like, you see the same with MMOs, where people are still saying like, is this going to be their WoW killer?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a franchise that a lot of people strive to emulate. At the time, it received 48 awards. Again, a different time for Game Awards. But this included Game of the Year from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences and Best Console Game from the BAFTAs. Yeah, Halo is credited with modernizing the first-person shooter genre. And it created this whole multimedia empire franchise with just a lineage of games and a lineage of sequels after it. I mean, Master Chief might as well be the mascot for Microsoft's gaming efforts as a whole.
Very much.
Even as Microsoft continued to push forward with their different Windows computing operating systems, when they had their own, artificial intelligence assistant voice, how can I help you kind of thing? What did they name that AI? Cortana. Like, completely makes sense. It's all pulled from Halo. But we talk about Halo today because of the music, and that is primarily responsible for Marty O'Donnell, born on May 1st, 1955. Didn't really specify where, but Marty O'Donnell described his upbringing as typical. He said his father made films, his mother taught piano, and he received piano lessons, and he wanted to start a rock band when he reached junior high school. While he was interested in progressive and fusion rock, he studied the classical component of music and composition at Wheaton College Conservatory of Music, and he received his Master's of Music degree from the University of Southern California in the early 1980s. He then moved to Chicago, and he expected to teach at the American Conservatory of Music, but he started as a grip in the film and TV business. A grip is someone who kind of helps, cameras move like on dollies, or helps with some of the lighting rigs, just kind of, hands on set, essentially. He eventually met someone named Michael Salvatore, who had his own music studio, and the two became partners in music production, and they established their own company, Total Audio. Now, Marty O'Donnell, for years, composed music in TV and radio advertisements, jingles. He created the jingles, the music, for Mr. Clean and Flintstones vitamins. So, that's pretty darn notable. In fact, both of his daughters were used in the children's choir, talking about, I'm a Flintstones kid, 10 million strong and growing. That's Marty O'Donnell's music. That's his daughters in that children's choir. But he eventually moved to game soundtracks after 15 years of composing in that field, after learning about Myst. and how there's like actual quote unquote legitimate music happening in that game space. He learned about Myst through industry connections. He met the developers. And so eventually, Marty O'Donnell was hired as a sound designer for Myst's sequel, Riven. Now, during the development of Riven, the team would often play a game called Marathon. And it was made by a developer called Bungie, who was based out of Chicago. So O'Donnell applied to work there, and he worked on Bungie's game Myth that same year. O'Donnell eventually joined Bungie as an actual employee 10 days before the company was acquired by Microsoft. So he was actually one of the few employees to actually stay on during the transition there. So yeah, he worked with Bungie for years. Like, he was the Bungie music guy. I mean, Salvatore helped him on projects, certainly, but Salvatore was also taking care of the day-by-day at their company, Total Audio. But eventually, there was quite a bit of a fallout between Marty O'Donnell and Bungie. And O'Donnell sued them that he was fired without cause and that money was withheld. A court actually ruled in O'Donnell's favor. So it was a pretty high-profile thing at that time for that, because there was a game called Destiny that O'Donnell was contributing music to, and he did help with that original Destiny score, but not after that, because he's no longer with the company. So in 2015, Marty O'Donnell helped found video game development studio Highwire Games. He composed their debut game, which is a PlayStation VR game called Golem that just released on November 15th, 2019. There are different video game composers that Marty O'Donnell admires, including Jeremy Soleil, Jason Hayes, Koji Kondo, and Nobuo Uematsu. He says he's not really influenced by them, though, because of his age and how long he's been composing. Instead, for classical composers, he's influenced by Beethoven, Brahms, Barber, as well as progressive rock groups like Jethro Tull and Genesis. He definitely believes in the importance of silence in composition, especially for games. Like, games, especially as they become more cinematic, don't need music playing all the time. It's important to embrace the silence, the quiet, and we've definitely heard that as games become more like films. Yeah, back in the NES and SNES days, games needed music all the time, but now not so much. He also prefers to compose closer to the ends of projects so that the timing with cutscenes and things like that can be as close as possible with the music he composes. He also says, as he continues to compose throughout time and as technology changes, quote, "For the last 20 years of technology, every time a new version of something comes out, the old version gets trashed, and I find myself unable to do something that I used to depend on." And boy, I feel that hard.
Yeah, I assume he means like with tools and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm experiencing that with Twitch right now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure, I bet. Yeah. So, just all a matter of adapting. So for Marty O'Donnell's discography, obviously big on the Halo franchise. Halo Combat Evolved, Halo 2, Halo 3 ODST, and Halo Reach. So basically, all of the Bungie games. These Bungie games also included Myth, Myth 2, and Oni. And he composed on Destiny, at least the beginning of Destiny. When it came to historical development notes for Halo Combat Evolved, the music composition is credited to Martin O'Donnell and Michael Salvatore. O'Donnell and Salvatore are credited singers on the soundtrack, along with friends that they'd met, including Robert Bowker, Jeffrey Morrow, and Rob Trow. So these are the singers for that Gregorian choir that you hear in the famous Halo theme. So yeah, you compose your music and I'm going to contribute singing to it. That's certainly something. The director of cinematics at Bungie gave the guidance that the music should give a feeling of importance, weight, and the sense of the ancient to the visuals of Halo. The music was written with a variety of equipment, including keyboard, synths, and samplers, as well as digital recording equipment controlled by computers. There were some live instrumentations from members of the Chicago Symphony and the Chicago Lyric Opera Orchestra, and these were added where it was needed. O'Donnell says he designed the music so that it, quote, could be disassembled and remixed in such a way that it would give him multiple interchangeable loops that could be randomly recombined in order to keep the piece interesting as well as a variable length. Development involved the creation of, quote, alternative middle sections that could be transitioned to if the game called for such a change, i.e. more or less intense. So this means essentially that in 2001, Halo's audio engine could play back chunks dynamically based on the player's actions. And that's a pretty significant thing for a 2001 game.
I can't imagine. Like, the closest I can think of is like some games on the 64. A lot of rare games have a dynamic soundtrack that changes depending on where you are in the level, but it's nothing of that caliber.
Yeah, and it's pretty remarkable. So then, yeah, when it comes to, making the soundtrack, there's a lot of, remixing that happens. It's taking that whole, again, we've talked about before, that 3D environment of possibilities that can happen with the sound and crushing it down to the most ideal 2D sound. And because O'Donnell was hired at Bungie directly, he could actually sit with the developers as they walked through levels to really get a sense of what the players should hear and feel at certain moments or after accomplishing certain tasks. I mean, we hear so many stories on the show of where the composer's off-site and we got to send video, or they had no idea until the last minute, but because O'Donnell was right there in-house, that definitely helped the cohesion between the game and the soundtrack. The Halo Combat Evolved soundtrack was reviewed as, quote, one of the better video game-oriented musical experiences out there, and that playing the game was not required to find enjoyment within the score. Of course, we've talked about on the show that context is everything, so of course, when it's in the moment and it has that context, it's even better, but it's a quality soundtrack even outside there. And even the physical version of the soundtrack release sold over 40,000 copies. So what does this sound like? This mix between choir and orchestral and just these different sounds coming together for this epic sound for a first-person shooter console game. Let's get to the 5 critical tracks. Have to start with the main theme of the entire franchise, Halo. Really hard not to pick just, the 30-second snippet here. Most people would be familiar with that Gregorian chant at the beginning. Whether it's, internet videos of boys in bathrooms trying to recreate it, things like that.
Those are the best.
Just
Those are so good.
Phenomenal. I know I didn't include it in the clip here, but you gotta go with the main melody. And what's that earworm that gets everyone saying, yep, that's undeniably the main theme of this game. Just an iconic video game song. The main theme of Halo. It's in D major, apparently. The starting choir's tempo is at 95 beats per minute, while the middle section ramps up to 120. This was composed over 3 days in the summer of 1999 by O'Donnell, and it was meant to be done specifically in time for that Macworld reveal. He says he used the Beatles' Yesterday as inspiration, and that O'Donnell was instructed that it needed to be, quote, ancient, epic, and mysterious. And yeah, it kind of hits all of those just so.
Yeah, I would agree. So I promised that I would tell another story about how I was a bad teenager, and this is where I'm going to tell it. We sight read this song in orchestra once. Our teacher wanted to play a video game song, and he found the Video Games Live version of it because they released their sheet music, and we sight read it, and we ended up not playing it because he didn't really like it. He didn't like the arrangement. He liked the song, he didn't like the arrangement. But of course, me being a bad teenager, this would have been like junior year of high school, I think. I was like, we can't play Halo. We're going to play a real video game song. And I made a list of 50 other songs from games and put all 50 of those songs on a flash drive and gave that to my teacher. And to his credit, he did listen to all 50 songs, or at least he told me he did. I don't know if he actually did. I think he did. We didn't end up playing a video game song. But, like, that's always the thing I'm going to remember the most about this song is that I was such a... Again, look, if you're a teenager and you're listening to this, and you have any game where you're like, that's not real gamers, which is my fun joke phrase for that kind of thing, because it's dumb, kick that habit immediately. Like, it's not... You're not gaining anything. There's no such thing as not a real game. And, like... enjoy things that you might not necessarily be a fan of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure your teacher was also like, where the hell am I going to get the scores for these other songs?
Yeah, that's actually probably exactly what killed it. And also, I do remember that when I gave it to him, and then 2 days later, I realized that I had forgotten one very important song that he actually probably could have found sheet music for, being One Winged Angel.
Oh,
so, yeah, that's...
Yeah, but then you'd have to get a choir for the orchestra.
No, not necessarily. Not important.
Would flutes play it? I don't know. Very interesting. So, I'm sure everyone who is familiar with game music knows this song. Like, this is the important one, right? It had to be here. But what about the others? Number 2 on the Critical 5, Brothers in Arms. This song plays several times throughout the game, starting in the Pillar of Autumn, which is the first level. I would say this is kind of like a theme for the UNSC Marines. It's got this march beat going. It's building brass and strings, like you're pushing forward, trying to push against the Covenant threat. And then it also then levels out with these lighter, more reflective strings. So it's a really good piece in that sense, like kind of represents, I think, what you'd more traditionally think of like a kind of military sci-fi theme. But yeah, like it's still a really good one. It's just like the driving beat to this is very memorable when you're playing.
So I will apologize to listeners pretty much right off the bat. I'm not going to have a huge amount to say about these because the Halo theme up to today is the only song off the soundtrack I've ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, I like the sort of march feel of this song a lot, honestly. It's, and being told that it's kind of the theme for a group of Marines. Yeah, that fits. I like it. It's good.
We're going to mellow out a little bit though. And number 3 on the Critical 5 here is A Walk in the Woods. Plays at a couple points during the game. This is during Assault on the Control Room, which is the 5th level, after the land bridge with the 2 Banshees here, which are essentially like alien spaceships that you can actually fly around. Not just like hover, but actually flying small spaceships from the Covenant forces. Also in 2 Betrayals, which is the 8th level, during the cutscene apparently after the last pulse generator is destroyed, until Cortana transports both her and Sheaf out. This one is just, yeah, super chill vibe with kind of like a choral sound. They got the beats going. Like, There are a couple songs that were kind of jockeying for this position, for this kind of sound, and I think this one won out. This one just really stands out in particular, also because like it's remade in future Halo games. In Halo 2's score, it shows up in the track Heretic Hero. It's released in Halo 3 and Walking Away in Halo Reach. So it's another example of like a song that does carry over into future Halo games. Kind of like a more chill vibe, but good beats going to it as well.
This song reminds me, I cannot put my finger on what game it reminds me of, but it sounds like it should be on the title screen of an old PC game.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's the kind of vibe I get from this song. I think it's the bass MIDI.
Yeah. I could hear that for sure. That's definitely a unique sound. Number 4 turns things up in a very spooky way. This is Devil's Monsters. This song is most identified as playing through the library, which is the 7th mission in the game. This is where the player discovers the threat of the Flood. And the Flood are these alien forces that a lot of small enemies that can just chip away and eat at your shields really quickly, but also these like groaning, almost Half-Life zombie like, almost head crab zombie, but not really, sort of enemies that will kind of swipe at you and they take a bit to go down. So yeah, this is the Flood. This is kind of their theme, and it's got some spooks to it. It's a really unsettling rhythm with these syncopated hits. And I think the melody is like kind of basic, and it kind of shows its 2001 age a little bit, but in a way that kind of almost makes it a little more unsettling. So it just goes for like, there's this big enemy threat that pops up halfway through the game, and it kind of shows why you need to do what you need to do on Halo. But yeah, it's a unsettling theme, but that kind of plays into the, I'm not going to say horror, but just kind of the spookier nature of the game.
All I know about the Flood is that they're supposed to be spooky. So
Yeah.
This fits perfectly, I guess. I thought they were in 2, though.
They are also in 2. They start, though, in 1.
Huh. I thought they started in 1. See, I don't know anything about Halo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is for the Flood. But we'll end our Critical 5 with Dust and Echoes. Another track that has a lot going for it. Difficult to pick just 30 seconds. But it plays at the end of The Maw, which is the last mission. Plays during the final cutscene in the game. This vocal section really plays up that Gregorian choir and just how good the harmonies are. And it just leaves you feeling desolate. Because at the end of the game, rather than infect the galaxy with the Flood, or activate Halo, which would destroy all intelligent life in the galaxy, you gotta destroy the ring itself, destroy Halo. Like, that's the only course of action. But, there's quite a terrible cost to that. And so, this track kind of leaves you just feeling alone, that you've lost a whole lot. And so, yeah, I think it's very successful in that regard. But again, a lot going for it on that track in particular, but the vocals, especially here, really stand out.
I'm glad you got one song with the vocals that you could put in the clip.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the main takeaway I have from this, because is there any other game? I can't think of another game that does them in quite this way. Not a famous game, not as big as this, at least.
Yeah, I think this is the one. I think it's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really cool effect. Like, I wish more games would do it, but I have a feeling I know why they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Because vocalists are expensive, and you can't just MIDI those. It doesn't work.
Not if you want to make it seem authentic. So, tracks on the cutting room floor, I have 2. One of them is Opening Suite. As you may guess, it plays during the opening cutscene of the game in Pillar of Autumn, the first level. Again, another one where it's like, there's a lot to this track, but the clip I've picked out, it's like these chords. If Halo didn't have its main iconic theme, like these chords and the way they sound are just so iconic for the series outside of the main theme, especially as like a setting up exposition kind of sound. So I had to put it in there for sure. And then for something a little more fun, we have On a Pale Horse.
I'm a cowboy.
On a pale horse, I'm death. This plays during vehicle combat, during Assault on the Control Room, which is the 5th level. Also, for the first time, the player takes control of a Banshee, and you're flying around in it. Oh boy, that takes some getting used to with those dual stick controls. Of course, On a Pale Horse, or Behold the Pale Horse, refers to the Revelations biblical verse of how death rides in. In fact, the Halo 3 version of this track is called Behold a Pale Horse. It just has this bouncy energy to it. The dot 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 dot, like that kind of gets you going. But then in the clip, as you say, it brings in more of the strings and makes it feel more triumphant as you are taking control of these vehicles and trying to shift the pace of battle. So that's definitely a fun one that stands out as far as like Halo's sound on its soundtrack. And that's really what I'll never forget about this game. Like again, it's a game that I'm not crazy about. It's more I'd play more for the gameplay, and I'm not someone who is steeped in Halo lore. Like even I've played 4 and 5, and like you get a good sense of what's generally happening, but I'm not about to read the novels or play extra side things. Like no, I'm plenty good there, but it's beyond just the Halo theme for me. Like I can't deny what this game has done for the industry and what its sound has done for game soundtracks as a whole.
I think that it would be insane to call Halo anything less than one of the most influential games ever made. Among them, at the very least. Like you said, this game is the reason why console shooters are successful now. They weren't successful before Halo. Like GoldenEye is pretty much the only... GoldenEye and certain versions of Doom are basically all you were going to get before this. And now it's like the biggest genre in video games. It's one of them.
Just remarkable. And all for 2 games, East versus West, 2001, PlayStation, Xbox. A great episode of Original Soundchat here. That will do it for us this week. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at TheRobaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also on rhymeswithasia.com, but it's that MP3 podcast version you want on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. Also find that MP3 podcast versions on podcast services of your choice. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts all around the world. Take us with you in your car, at work, on a run. I mean, when you're at work, we won't tell your boss that you're listening to soundtracks and conversations about them and all that goes along with it. We're going to try to get on Spotify pretty soon, I think. We've got our Spotify playlist that... is there anything that we're adding to that playlist for this week?
I believe Halo is on there. Final Fantasy X, I know for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe Halo is on Spotify.
So we may get some additions there, but also we're going to try adding our show. We tried to play very to the letter of the law by the rules, but it seems like Spotify may not be as strict as we initially thought.
Yeah, after talking to some people and thinking about like some of the other podcasts on Spotify, I think we'll be fine.
Okay. So yeah, more places to listen to this show. And then when you're done, you can come find us on social media at Soundchat OST to give feedback on how we're doing and also give us suggestions for games that you'd like us to cover on the show. We're in December, so let's talk about our December end of year plans. This comes out on the 10th. We do have an episode coming out on the 17th and even one on the 24th on Christmas Eve. So those will be normal episodes. But then when it comes to New Year's Eve on December 31st, we've been kind of hinting at this for a while. We'd like to do a best of 2019 episode for original Soundchat. So we've been keeping our ears to the ground on game soundtracks all year for 2019. And we're hoping to pull together a list between the two of us that is like what we think is a definitive top 10 game soundtracks of 2019. Give you 5 critical tracks for each one of those, and then also do a bunch of honorable mentions with one song for each of those. So it should be a good collection of game soundtracks in 2019, at least we think so. And then going forward, we'd like to kind of work backwards in years and try to make lists like that for each of the years going back 2018, 17, 16, etc. So that's what we're hoping to do. But until then, 2 more episodes. Until then, we'll somehow push through the holiday season. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I am going to do what could potentially be a huge train wreck of an episode and talk about not just one artist, but various artists.
Very interesting. I'll still focus on one, though, and he goes by Revo. What could we be talking about there? If you listen to our Q&A episode, you may be able to pick up on mine. But for now, we'll play us out and we'll pull a song here from OC Remix. It's been a while, but a 2001 game like Halo should have a collection of songs on OC Remix. There's one called Sierra 117, and it's by Laura Platt. She goes by PL511 on that community. It's a nice orchestral take on the main Halo theme. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. Thanks so much for listening to us this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.